gentleman, Mr. Olusegun Elemo, public finance and policy consultant. Yes, encourage him, please, as he takes the podium.
Yeah, good morning, Your Excellencies, commissioners, permanent secretaries, directors, and of course, good morning to the organizers. I want to believe that, okay, thank you. I just wanted to check my presenter. All right, thank you very much for having me. Incidentally, when I speak, I like to move around, but I've been constrained to this box, so I'll make do with the box, and we'll see how far we'll go. But just to, before I go into my presentation, I understand that I have 45 minutes for my presentation, and then we can take the questions afterwards. And I'm speaking on implementing policy priorities to enable rights and protection of vulnerable citizens. I'll be speaking from the lens of public spending, the fiscal space particularly. I am a student of public policy. I have my background in accounting, my master's degree in research and public policy, and I'm currently undertaking my doctoral research in public policy. Particularly, I am investigating the relevance of co-production to effective socioeconomic interventions in Nigeria during health emergencies, and a case study of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that bears relevance to the discussion we're having today. But before I go into the discussion, Mr. Eze touched on some of the things that the gentleman from the CRCDU mentioned yesterday, the relevance of having delivery units. And I just want to say that to the honorable commissioners, as you go back, those are some of the take-home to see how you can adopt this model, do create a delivery unit. And the reason I'm saying that is because we on this other side, as oversight actors from the civil society, do monitor what governments are doing, but it's more important that the data comes from government, and then we can double check from what's happening on our side. So it would be good that at the state level, we're also having data as to effectiveness of policy implementation from your end. And I think the delivery unit will do justice to that. The second point has to do with what Mr. Eze also mentioned about laws and policies, the implementation of them. And he said that we have numerous laws, and indeed we are not short of laws and policies. But what I understand, having walked this path for the last decade, is realizing that those laws and policies will not by default implement themselves. Someone has to be held accountable, and there must be a mechanism for that. So that's also one of the reasons why you should have that delivery unit. The other point is the policy development process, whether at the national or subnational level. Like I mentioned earlier, as a doctoral researcher, I'm beginning to see evidence that much of the policies, there are less co-production elements into it and really becomes unsustainable. Where policies are not co-produced properly with the relevant stakeholders, once a particular actor leaves the office, it becomes useless and unimplementable. So you want to look to a situation where you bring all the people, all the actors together in developing the policy, and then the ownership of the policy. And I think someone mentioned yesterday, I think it was the gentleman again from the CRCDU, talking about the political will around policy implementation. You need the chief executive to own the process and then the implementation becomes seamless. The other point I wanted to quickly touch on is the school feeding procurement that Mr. Eze mentioned, and to sort of investigate what happened with the procurement, whether women who actually should be the one cooking actually participated actively in the procurement process. But we are all aware that a former minister mentioned that there was school feeding during the COVID-19 pandemic. You remember the case. I wouldn't say more than that. Okay, then the other point about monitoring outcomes and not outputs. I think, and we are going to get to that, but just to speak ahead of myself a little bit, the only instrument that I have seen that is very potent at measuring outcomes is performance audit instrument. It measures efficiency, which has to do, it measures the economy, which has to do with the cost of input, measures the efficiency of the process, which has to do how inputs transform into outputs, and then measures the effectiveness, which has to do with how the outputs actually ties with outcomes, realization of policy objectives. So we're going to get to that. And then finally, Nigeria having expenditure problem and not revenue problem. There is the general phenomenon or notion that we have revenue problem. But having investigated the process, again, over the last decade, it's much of an expenditure problem. We need to spend properly, monitor what we are spending, and use the little resources to achieve bigger outcomes. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll move straight to my slide. Across Nigeria's 36 states, the struggle for women's rights, protection, and justice remain uneven. While some states have made progress, sorry, please, if you can help me stay a little bit. All right, thank you. While some states have made progress in passing laws to safeguard women, children, and persons with disabilities, enforcement remains weak. Gender-based violence persists. Child protection laws are not uniformly implemented, and economic opportunities for women are still limited. Now, in terms of looking at the vulnerability context, for out-of-school children, you can see that 1 in every 3 Nigerian child is estimated to be out of school, and the number is approximately 20 million. When I was developing my presentation, I sort of looked at the disaggregated data, looking at exactly where these numbers are domiciled, but I didn't like what I saw, and I didn't want to put anybody on the spot here. So I decided to lump everything up, because indeed, a crisis to one is a crisis to all. For women, we have 3.6% only in the Senate, 4.7% in the House of Reps, and 15 states in Nigeria currently have no female representation in their houses of assembly. Again, close to about 90 million Nigerians live in extreme poverty on less than $1.9 a day. Nigerian women account for 70% of that number, even though they make up 49% of the general population. That's a disastrous situation. I don't know how better to describe it. Again, looking at the vulnerability context, 1 in 5 board members of companies represented on the Nigerian Stock Exchange are women. Only 1 in 5. 19 million people, or approximately 9.6% of our population, had disability as of 2018. Of course, you know the numbers have increased. Now, I sort of, because we announced late last year our policy accountability lab, the very first in Nigeria and incidentally the very first in Africa. We're establishing a policy accountability lab in the Federal Capital Territory here, and we announced that late last year when we celebrated the 8th anniversary of our organization. We hope to have the lab launch possibly by middle of this year, in maybe the next couple of months. But while we were doing some preliminary research work around the lab, we did reach out to some of you who are seated here, and we asked for your policy documents around certain themes, one of which is gender. And also to ask this rhetorical question. I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, and you don't necessarily have to answer. But how many states do have their own policy? Not the one, well, you may have adopted something from the federal, but the one you can say there's a policy on gender in my state. How many states? You don't need to put it, you don't need to put, thank you. Because you really have to. It's not about domesticating something from the federal. Yes, you can domesticate it, but you must own it at your own level. So we looked at what subnational rights and protection policy objectives outlook should look like, and this is a case from Cardinal State, from the 2020 Social Protection Policy. And you can see the labor market intervention. By the way, the policy document is not like this, we transformed it. So the labor market interventions enable economically disadvantaged residents to engage in productive activities. Then you have social insurance, offer protection against risks and shocks that could lead to extreme poverty. Then you have social assistance, provide support to the poorest and most vulnerable groups, including children, women, individuals with disability, and the elderly. Then you have social care, establish community-based outreaches to connect vulnerable individuals to essential services, and finally, institutional frameworks. Now, because Ms. Isaac has really dealt a little bit on what subnational governments are putting to gender, but against what objectives? Because at the end of the day, you see that you're spending money, but you are not informatively spending money. So what is driving the budgeting, the planning? What is driving it? And like I said, if you had a policy that was properly co-produced, whether this commissioner leaves and another one comes in, it doesn't really matter. The process continues. As such, when the new commissioner comes in, he's also budgeting and planning against these same objectives, not against any other objective. And you will now see why you can spend money over a decade and you are not moving the needle an inch. You are not solving the problem. There is no impact, there is no outcome that you can really point to. All you are seeing are just quick deliverables that people are getting away with. Now, I did a review, of course, based on the topic I was given to discuss. Subnational fiscal outturn on rights and protection of vulnerable groups across region. Again, I didn't want to put anybody on the spot, so I decided to do regional assessment. And Mr. Isaac again mentioned earlier that it's not about the budget, it's about what is released at the end of the day. So for instance, in the Northwest, I did something on 3 states. The budget amount for gender to enable rights and protection of vulnerable groups is 3.9 billion. What was released is 2.7 billion. So you have a credibility of 71%. Then you have the Northeast. You have just 2 states there, which incidentally overspent the budget. But those are very rare cases. Very, very rare cases. If you are in public finance, you know that those are very extremely rare cases. Then you have North Central. And this, again, to mention, someone talked about data availability yesterday. And I think it's important because I know that one of the response was that there is data and all of that. Yes, there is data, but not as much as it should be. And we can't really solve the problem we have if the data are not available. For instance, when we requested your policy document last year, many of the states turned it down. They didn't respond. That's data accessibility issue. The reason why Nasarawa doesn't now have release is because of data accessibility issue. We need to put the data out there so that everyone can make use of it and we can all help ourselves, not necessarily to put anybody on the spot. But this is Southwest, and we only have data on those states. Budgeted 911 million and only released 272 million, 29% credibility. Then we have Southeast. We did something on 5 states. Budget stood at 5.6 billion. Release stood at 625 million. You can see the gap, 11%. Then on South-South, 3 states, budget stood at 10 billion, release stood at 8 billion, 80%. So you can see what actors are doing in their different sphere and how incidentally it's going to impact on the outcome. Not necessarily because they have spent the money, but it's important that they do spend the money on the right things. And then we can look at the outcomes. Now, percentage of public spending on rights and protection of vulnerable groups against capital expenditure. Because we don't want to reduce this to some tokenism sort of thing. So we want to check against capital spending. What are states spending on? And what is the percentage of what they are dedicating to gender issues against their capital expenditure? Again, the Northeast, you have a capital expenditure for 2 states in the Northeast, a capital expenditure of 133 billion. The gender component stood at 7.9 billion. That's less than 6%. In the Northwest, 3 states, you have a capital budget of 219 billion. And then you have funds to gender equality at 2.7 billion. That's 1.27% of the capital spending. For Southeast, you have 4 states there, total capital spending at 229 billion, funds to gender 625 million naira, 0.27%. Southwest, you have total capital spending of 49 billion, total spending on vulnerable groups at 272 million, 0.55%. For South-South, you have 680 billion as capital spending. Total spending on vulnerable groups stood at 8.2 billion, 1.2%. So you can see that we really need to do some conscious planning, conscious spending, and actively looking at the objectives and see whether the spending are delivering on the objectives. Because it's not enough to just spend. But then I took it a step further to see what exactly we're spending on. And then there's something I now call budget conformity with rights and protection of vulnerable citizens, looking at the 2023 spending of subnational entities. So, for instance, you have a project, implementation of Women Development Program for support group and adolescent girls in Jigawa State, which had 30 million naira approved for it. You could say those are the kinds of things you want to see. You also have world-based solution cooperatives for economic empowerment. And this is a beautiful one if it's well implemented. In Anambra State, it has 1.5 billion. And then you have procurement of assistive device for the disabled and grants to the skilled disabled. In Anambra State, 14 million approved for it. And then finally, you have renovation, equipping, and furnishing of Girls Skill Acquisition Center in Katsina, which had 30 million approved for it. So these are budget conformity with rights and protection of vulnerable groups. Those are the kinds of things that you want to consciously and actively in the mind plan and budget for. But there are other issues as well. You have budget deviation. Well, depending on where you are sitting on the divide, you may not see it as deviation, but like I said, it depends. So you have something in Anambra State, control of street begging in urban cities through value orientation and sensitization. And I'm wondering, how would you really control street begging with value orientation and sensitization? Do you sensitize people out of begging? Would they really yield to that? But you have 20 million naira approved for that. Again, who are the procurement guys who would do the sensitization? Yeah. Then, well, if I knew this much earlier, I'll probably be having babies every first day of the year. Because I now saw that there is anniversary and celebration for first baby of the year. And I'm wondering what I've been doing with myself. Why I have not been having babies. Yeah, so there's 3 million approved for that as well. Yeah. And you can go on and on and on and on. You know, talking about the kind of mindset that goes into planning the budget. Incidentally, policy objectives will not achieve themselves. The quality of life will not automatically improve. It takes policy actors looking at the objectives, planning for it in the budget, ensuring that those programs and projects are effectively implemented, and monitoring and evaluating the outcomes. Now, you need, like I said, you need policy, you need budgeting. Incidentally, you need auditing. I don't know how much collaboration exists between your office and the Office of the Auditor General in your state. But what I can tell you categorically is that if you will achieve anything significant, you know, in your office as commissioners, you will need the cooperation of the Auditor General. Because that's the only institution that has the capacity to monitor what you're looking for and to see whether the money you're budgeting against the programs, against the policy objectives, are actually realizing, you know, the intended outcomes. To achieve meaningful progress in gender equality and social inclusion, governments must integrate gender-focused policies, budgeting techniques, and auditing principles into their governance frameworks. First of all, ensure that the documents are even publicly available. The policy documents. Like I said, not many states even have the policy. When you ask them, you say, oh, we're using the federal policy. No, don't use the federal policy. Domesticate it if you have to, but own it. Own your own policy. If it's word for word, fine. But let it be that, okay, so state, this is our policy. And we have committed to following through with implementing this. And we will hold ourselves accountable based on the objectives that are here. And we are going to plan our budget along these same objectives. And that's what will, because when you are looking at those objectives that you have committed yourself to, that is what will push you to the Ministry of Education, for instance, to say, hey, how can you help me in this regard? What can you do? What can you put in your budget for us? That's what will push you to the Ministry of Health. That's what will push you to the Ministry of Agriculture. Hey, what can you do for us? This is what we have committed to. What can you put in the budget for us to help us realize it? And at the end of the day, you have, a collective approach, even at the Executive Council. You have a collective approach to implementing the same documents that we've, signed up to. So, but again, let's see the document, because we can't even see the document to start with for many states. It's not publicly available. So how do we even measure as external oversight bodies? Then you now move to gender budgeting techniques. And I know that Mr. Eze, who, of course, is a professional in that regard, has also touched briefly on that. You need to ensure that financial allocations address gender disparities and promote social equity. And it takes conscious planning, creative planning. It's not just from the blues. Well, I'm not in public service. I don't know whether I will get into public service anyway. But I do, all my life revolves around public policy. So, and public finance. So I know what's happening in there. But I don't know how much thoughtfulness goes into writing those project description, or someone just, carves something somehow and then allocates funds to it. Whether there is proper needs assessment, whether there is research driving it, whether there is data supporting it, because those are things. If you see programs and projects that are data-driven and evidence-based, you will see the difference. It is a departure from sensational budgeting. Governments should allocate resources based on gender impact assessment, ensuring that women, men, and vulnerable groups benefit equitably from public spending. Sectoral budgets, like education, health, security, social protection, must integrate gender consideration to address specific needs of marginalized communities. Again, is that, you see, we have interacted with auditors general from across the 36 states, and we do that annually, and now we are interacting with auditors general for local governments. Incidentally, we are going to publicly present our annual flagship research report, which is the Subnational Audit Efficacy Index for the 2024. We're going to present it on the 20th of this month. And we're going to have all the auditors general come to Abuja for that presentation. One of the things we're asking the auditors general now is, how much of audits are you conducting on gender? But the problem is they can't even do much as they would do when the budget is not having due consideration to gender. So we're finding a way around that, but it's just to also, because you are the executive, it's just to also nudge you that you should actively consider all of these gender issues as you plan, as you budget. And if you would need to work with research institutes, civil society, to help you with the data that will inform the budgeting, please do reach out so that we can assist as required. Capacity building programs should be implemented for policymakers, budget officers, and legislators to enhance their ability to integrate gender-responsive financial planning. I cannot overstate that. And of course, this is one of those of such capacity building going on here. Now, to the auditing part. Gender audits evaluate how government spending impacts gender equality and social inclusion, but it comes right from the budgeting before it gets to the audit, as you know, the public finance management cycle. Regular performance audits should address whether gender-focused initiatives receive adequate funding and produce intended outcomes. And I mentioned this earlier when I started. That's the only instrument you can use. And it's what is being used globally now. We had a session with the Government Accountability Office of the United States, and we brought all the auditors general to interact with the GAO. And one of the shocking things that the auditors general from Nigeria heard was that the GAO doesn't conduct, in fact, the GAO conducts 90% performance audit and 10% financial and compliance audit. 90% performance audit. And that, because everyone is looking, whether you're looking at climate, whether you're looking at gender, whatever subject you're looking at, the only instrument that can enable you get the maximum impact and outcome is performance audit. So we're pushing hard on that locally here. Civil society participation through social audit will enhance transparency, accountability, and corrective actions where necessary. And again, is to say to the honorable commissioners in the room, because you are the politicians, I don't think the permanent secretaries and the directors have as much issues as the politicians do. Because the politicians are always very, circumspect in their dealings with civil society particularly, because they don't know who is who, But trust me, there are credible civil society organizations you can work with out there in your states. You just need to do a proper background check. And you need them on your side to provide you with the data and the evidence and to support you to track what you're doing. Not necessarily because they will come hard on you, but they will criticize you constructively. And take those constructive criticism as part of the journey. We were in a state about 3 weeks ago, I don't want to mention the states, and civil society colleagues were really, in fact, we had a session at about night, and they were telling me that, you see, we're not allowed to work in our state. In fact, once we do, we get hounded. In fact, there was a case of the governor calling the civil society and say, you guys must not do this, must not do that. No. Let's see the civil society sector as part of the journey, because they do bring so much value into our work. The use of gender disaggregated data in audits will improve evidence-based policy reforms and enhance the efficiency of public spending. Now, straight to the role of stakeholders in advancing effective policy implementation of rights and protection of vulnerable groups. Effective policy implementation for protecting vulnerable citizens requires coordinated efforts from multiple stakeholders. Governments often pass progressive policies, yes they do, but enforcement remains weak, as you know, due to funding gaps, we have seen that, lack of monitoring and weak accountability mechanism, exactly why we are doing what we're doing. Role of legislature, budgeting and resource allocation. You need the Committee on Operations, as you know, on your side. Make a case, evidence-based case for your budget proposal. Yes, there could be funding issues and you can move things here and there, but hey, you even have a situation where there are no funding issues and budgets still get cut because there is no justification for the spending. Then you have the oversight and accountability. Again, you need the Public Accounts Committee, because that's the committee that receives the report of the Auditor General in your state. So you need that committee to understand the gender subject and why it is important and why they should demand it from the Auditor General to continue to conduct that kind of audits. Then implementation of audit laws. This is one of the biggest issues we're dealing with in the country today. Again, our research report in the next couple of days will further show where we stand as a country. But 33 out of 36 states have audit laws. And I'm sure many of the states seated here have audit laws. Implementation is an issue. We're driving at it. And I think a couple of weeks ago, we were still in Yobe State where we had to go meet with the governor directly to make a case for these things. And we're engaging, including with the Nigeria Governors Forum, because these are very important legislation that will drive some of the impacts and outcomes that we're looking out for. Then you need the Auditor General on your side, like I said. Conducting performance audits, I don't want to continue to emphasize that. And enhancing transparency, publishing reports of the Auditor General, and recommending corrective actions that will help improve the implementation of your programs and your policies. Of course, I mentioned this, you need the civil society to help you track policy implementation, monitoring whether government programs reach intended beneficiaries, using tools like social audit, citizen scorecard, and community reports. And then collaboration with the media. You need all of this to help you. Now, I mentioned this when I started, our Policy Accountability Lab. Incidentally, we do have a civic technology tool, the policytracker.ng. It's a social innovation tool that enables citizens and other stakeholders, including policymakers like yourself, researchers and development partners, to track implementation of policies that enhances achievement of sustainable development goals at national and subnational level. To sort of further give flesh to this, we started the Nigeria Accountability Summit in 2023. Of course, the very first in the country, where we now bring policymakers like yourself annually to look at your policy objectives and whether there's movement towards outcome. It's just to say that we encourage you as very important actors in the field. Your role is extremely strategic to improving the quality of lives for vulnerable citizens and, by extension, every Nigerian. Thank you very much.
Hello. Another interesting and illuminating presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time well spent and well managed as well. I liked the slide on budget deviation. You know, the one that said 3 million for first baby of the year. You know, we must accept the truth. Did he say that we should not born baby?
Yeah.
Did he say that we should not celebrate when a baby is born?
Yeah.
But 3 million, multiply that by, you know, some people even visit like 5 places. And you're saying that your budget is 200 million. If you multiply 3 million by, maybe you went to 5 homes on January 1st, 3, 5, 15, that's 15 million. That's 15 million. Okay, the 3 million is for, okay, so it will be divided by 5. Okay, either way, Sha. But you do get the meat of the point he's making. All those things are good, but in the general scheme of things, let us, as we are trying to manage resources, let us find what really works. In fact, when he started, he said it's not enough to just spend. We have to check if we are meeting priorities. That was so profound for me, and it stuck. Thank you so much. Okay, question. Where's the first hand?
Good morning. My name is Maria Muazu from Kaduna State. I saw you gave example of Kaduna State. That's why I want to
put the mic well.
I want to put up something. The social protection policy came about as a result of the demographic dividend report that was produced. And that gave analysis of the gaps that we have between the working age and the younger ones that are dependent age. And number 2, it shows the markets, the labor market value, so that we can engage the young persons who are more in population in our state, to be able to place them on those sectors that we analyze. So that was why some of those policies was as a result of that. And then showed us the gap between the working age and the dependent age as at then to be 19 years. So government was putting up structures, accelerating programs so that it can cover that gap of 19 years of age. So, and then we have the Open Governance Partnership Platform. It's led by the young persons. It is open, is a CSO kind of thing. They are co-chairs, young persons. They monitor, they make sure that government is accountable in terms of budgetary provisions are made. They track everything and they give us results like every year.
Which
they
state,
report
which state is that?
Kaduna. So they now call us to come and hear the report. So for those that are not doing well, they have to sit up, and for those that are doing well, they commend them. So if you reach out to the platform www.opengovernancepartnership for Kaduna State, you will see the reports there, because it's there since 2016, but they have a steering committee by 2021, and they have action plans from 2024 to 2025, and they are tracking. They are still tracking.
Thank you.
And then for the gender-sensitive budgeting, when we noted that there are gaps, Commissioner Haji Arab Salisu led the Committee of Management to the Budget and Planning Commission before even the budget defense itself to clamor for more budget for gender responsiveness. So we now have results, because before, SACs don't have budget provision. SAC centers, which we had 4, so they now have budget provision for each of those SACs to function very well. And then our budget for women economic empowerment then was 200 million. But now, provision in that budget. So we make sure that we clamor and make a case for child-sensitive budgeting and then gender-responsive budgeting. Thank you.
So that's an inspiring success story, right? Come to the front. Come. The second line, yes.
Good day, everyone. When I saw the presentation you made towards the Southeast, Commissioner for Gender Affairs, Enugu State.
Ogun State?
Enugu State.
Okay, thank you.
It's heartbreaking indeed, though in my state, we had the privilege of assessing our budgets because our governor is a gender-friendly governor. But Southeast generally, we have this belief, or there is this belief that where a woman is being seen as a property or something that belongs to the man. And I believe that that is what affects our budgeting towards gender, especially the women. And it seems as if it is charity being done to the women, not their rights to access this budget. And most of the times, the challenges most of us have, like the previous speaker said, that it is not enough to allocate budget or to budget for something. The main thing is assessing the budget. So my question now is, how do we, Commissioners of Women Affairs in the Southeast, how do we push harder to make sure that we assess our budget without it being look like we are trying to push back on what the government is doing, or we are trying to be stubborn, or because there is this the day we had in Enugu, our governor usually have stakeholders meeting where the CSOs and everyone comes. You throw your questions at him, and someone mentioned the 35% affirmation for women, and a House of Assembly member that was seated beside me was like, "Who is stopping you women from coming out to contest? Your number is many. You people are always making noise, that you are being marginalized. But sometimes you're the one holding yourself." So when you speak out like that, it will seem as if like you're trying to match up with the men or to rub shoulders with the men. That is the problem we generally have towards the Southeast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, where is the next hand? But while the mic is making its way to the next person, and this does not affect how you choose to respond to her question. But if you remember what I said in my last comment at the end of the first, yes, it's, sometimes how we ask for our rights. This equality matter, there are many dimensions to it. It's your right, though. And if you choose to sit down and be tapping your foot while asking for it, it's your freestyle. But if you really want results within the context of your socio-cultural and socio-political dynamics, a point of total confusion. You see, when you are confused, even in front of a child, that child is obliged to clarify something for you. But if you approach it from the fact that the Constitution says, I sure you know Constitution, no quote it for yourself. Do you understand? All of you will drag the Constitution and who went to law school and who didn't go. But when you start with, you know, I'm not very sure. I don't really understand how this is captured. If you could just clarify for me, because I'm not sure. This place where they put vulnerable citizens, does that include the persons with disability, or is just those that are deaf? Did you get what you just said? You know, by the time somebody listens, you say, hey, what type of question is this? And then we ask it again. You say, you know what? Then you really add a different layer of confusion. By this time, it's the Commissioner for Finance that will be answering it. By that time, everybody is learning. The answer, you bring another dimension to it. Even the governor will then say, can you meet me after the session so that we really underscore what this session is about? By that time, you are getting access to table that matter properly. I'm hoping to address some of these things when we're doing communication tomorrow, right? So, sorry, don't let me distract. Where was the other hand? Yes, please. Come to you.
Thank you very much. Good day, everybody. My name is Blessing Azubike from Imo State. Thank you, our presenter. I just want some kind of clarification. We are talking about gender-responsive budgeting. You know, most of us come from the angle of we're not professionals in budgeting. I would appreciate if we can have some kind of checklist or some kind of criteria that will help us, you know, whenever we are preparing the budget to ensure that they are gender responsive, they address the right issues based on our policies and our laws, and then we expect to have the intended outcomes at the end of the day. You know, because most of the time we dwell on the activities. We are not sure if the activities are going to produce the outcomes that we intend. So what are the things that we should be looking at? You know, the very important points and issues, how we're going to couch, you know, subsequently, because very soon we'll be talking about budget, you know, in the cycle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take from Haja in green, then we'll come bring the mic next to check.
Good morning, all. Thank you for that insightful.
Sorry, which state was that?
Imo.
Imo, and you are?
Niger.
Niger.
I think some of the issues raised might not be unconnected with the divide between the politicians and the civil servant, then other stakeholders. Before budgeting, there's what we call town hall meetings. And sometimes...
Please bring the mic to your... Yeah.
Sometimes the commissioners are not even invited to these town hall meetings. Usually they tell commissioner of information, not all the commissioners, sometimes. And the people themselves, they don't even know their rights. It's a major concern. Even the people who are having the town hall meetings don't know their rights. Then there are other policy issues concerning the gender policy and the rest of them, which the policymakers and the planners know. So by the time we come to a convergence with the Ministry of, with the Planning Commission, and they will say, no, this is what the people want. And the people may not really what they want, or this is what the government has promised them. So there is a big disconnect in that, and that is why the deliverables might not be achievable, and that is why sometimes there is kind of conflict even between the implementers and the stakeholders. So this, I think, we need to address them at maybe gatherings like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Mic to Madam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, the presenter
Thank
of
you.
this sensitive topic. Is very, very apt. Budgeting, planning, auditing. Very important so far as public service is concerned. I want to give special thanks to my dear governor in my state for you to bring budget, present budget to him. You know, he's a professional accountant.
Which state is this?
Rivers State. He's a professional accountant. He was one-time accountant general. So for you to bring budget to him, he scrutinized it. He knows what it is. He knows what everything and how to spend it. Sometimes after approval, when it comes to your memo you raise for a project you want to execute in your own ministry, you raise a memo. After approval, you find out, I think you mentioned something of that nature, to release become a problem. You'll be moving up and down for the release of that approval. You may not see it. And sometimes you see that that project is very critical. You have already started to find a way you will get money, because since you have seen the approval, with the hope that that money will come out, you now look for everywhere to get money to start. At the end of the day, you don't get that release. You see that you find it trouble or problem. You may not get the release. And you are tired of going and begging and begging and begging until you will find a way to settle the people you earn. So that is one thing where the commissioners.
So what are you asking?
How? When that money is not released, how do you get it at last to settle those debts?
Oh, okay, because why I'm asking.
Another thing.
You will finish. Why I'm asking, Anti-Dio FCT
Yeah.
referenced the same thing
Okay.
yesterday in terms of out of pocket.
Okay.
Based on you've seen indication of approval. I don't want to say approval.
Okay,
You've
yes,
seen indication
yes,
of approval,
yes.
and then you spend against that indication, but then it doesn't happen, and then you enter K-leg because the matter hang. So, okay, finish your next point.
Another issue I want to raise, which was spoken today concerning the area of visiting first babies of the year, or like Christians, Christmas babies. The Muslims know what they term their own, but those particular festivity period, a child is born and you visit those homes. Most times we do it in our state. First lady of the state does it with the Commissioner for Women Affairs. We visit those public institutions and they give them something. And those first baby of the year, it's not only the first baby, all children that are inside that area, they must give them.
So what the point you're making is that you even add to what was approved.
What I want to say is that they are not unnecessary. Those things
We
are
didn't
necessary.
say they are not.
Okay, because they add values.
So are you making a case for first babies? That's what this point is about.
They are necessary.
Okay.
Yes,
so
they
we
are
are not the approving committee.
Okay, thank you so much.
At this point.
Thank you so much.
You get. Okay, let's take from you.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Person the ball. Okay, yes, go on.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Madam Yusuf Ibrahim, the Director of Child Development and Protection, Ministry of Women and Children's Affairs, Sokoto State.
Sokoto.
Let me start by appreciating the presenter. To be very sincere, I can understand the importance of involving the Auditor General of the state, at the same time civil society, in making our budget responsible. My question here for you, let me just go straight to the point. During your presentation, there is a place you said policies without co-production. Let me understand that, because to my belief, during the development of every policy, every key stakeholders are involved from the beginning, maybe to the end. So what do you mean by that policies without co-production? Thank you.
Okay, great question. Is there another hand? Did we miss some? No, plenty like this. Okay, let's take from the extreme, that side. The two hands beside you. So after her, the one behind her.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Juliet. I work with Advocacy for Women with Disability Initiative. We are a part of SGBV team, FCT. So my question and concern is, when you are making presentation on vulnerability, like vulnerable group, I am thinking the vulnerable group could be classified so that persons with disability, women with disability, we can be intentional in every intervention. Because, and also, I don't know if the budget monitoring stops with allocation, so that we can know that if so amount has been allocated for a vulnerable group, what happens after the allocation? Because we have situations where there are budget for persons with disability, but at the end of the day, it's not really, they don't really use it for what it was being allocated for. Yeah. And then also, I think when a budget is being implemented, the persons with disability, or even persons who knows or who works with this person, that is where the CSOs comes in, should be at the table, so that we'll use the budget for what is really useful. Because if you sit at the table and you maybe assume it is wheelchair, we'll use this budget to buy and distribute for persons with disability. I want us to know that we have different clusters of disability. So when you buy a wheelchair, you have not actually met all the clusters.
Well,
because we
well
have
captured.
Who are using crutches. We have people who are blind who will need guiding.
Well captured. Well captured. Thank you.
Thank you.
The person behind you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Uzoma Aneto. I work with Ndodoko Foundation, a member of the FCT Sexual and Gender-Based Response Team. Just like in line with what she said, my own has to do with the legal framework as regards to retirement or giving accountability of the budget spent. Just like how the visual display showed us each budget line items. Is there any legal framework that says at the end of, before a new budget is approved, let us go back to these line items and begin to say 34 billion was spent on this? Is there anything like this that happened? And like a scorecard before a new budget is approved.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yes, the gentleman on the right.
Protocol duly observed. My name is Mr. Maradon Koda, Director of Child, Ebony State Ministry of Women Affairs.
Ebony.
Yes. My question goes like this. During every year budget preparations and defense, the Minister of Budgets told all that the Federal Minister of Budget want uniformity in budget preparations. And the issue of gender, they always sum the amount on gender issues. Now, my question is, how do we harmonize the issue of gender indicators as since yesterday and this morning they have been taught? So how do we address that?
Great question. Thank you. Where is the last hand? Here, she's forward.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mrs. Chinwe Achubu, Anambra State. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very impressed with your talk. As we are talking, you were emphatically mentioning collaboration with some groups, and you mentioned collaboration with the Auditor General, Accountant General. And you didn't throw more light on the nature of this collaboration so that we can, please, if you could just throw more light on that.
All right, thank you. Okay, back to you, sir.
Wow, it's a lot of questions. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I will just take it one after the other. I'm coming. Let me take my notes. Okay. Just to ensure that I don't miss anything out. Okay. On the issue, on the question, comments raised by the lady from Kaduna State. Yes, I acknowledge the fact that policy, the social protection policy, was informed by the demographic dividend report. And again, that's why we should ensure that there's evidence at the heart of policy making. It just helps to dissuade any sentiment or bias or anything. We're dealing strictly with data. So I agree with that. And just to also mention that I think Kaduna State stands out in some of these development activities because I know that our journey towards ensuring citizen participatory audit, we started our journey in 2017, I believe. And one of the first places that called on us at that time was Kaduna State because they wanted to learn how citizen participatory audit could improve service delivery. We reached out to a number of states even after then, but they weren't forthcoming. And fast forward many years after, Kaduna has now, because we just developed a framework, the citizen participatory audit framework for Kaduna State. We completed that process just a few weeks ago. And during the development of the framework, we had all the accountability mechanism actors, the Auditor General for local governments, and the civil society. And we all agreed on what will be done afterwards. We expect that the citizen participatory audit will now bring other stakeholders into the fold, which they have already been doing, but we're institutionalizing the process. I mean, the bottom line is a lot of things are happening in Kaduna State, which we think can be adapted to other states. There is the comment from Enugu, which talks about charity budgeting, charity budgeting, and how do we access the budget for gender. I think that comment had been partly addressed by the moderator, saying that there is no need to be confrontational in your ask from the executive. But I think this doesn't go without saying that we need to ensure that policy development, budgeting are driven by data. And all the actors need to be involved in the data, in the research, in the evidence that is supporting the process. If perhaps maybe the SSG or the Commissioner of Finance, because I know that the Chief Executive, the Governor, might not necessarily have the time to get into all of this. But if we co-opt the SSG, the Commissioner of Finance, to ensure that the process is data-driven, when the request comes, when the ask comes, when the memos are approved, I think there will be less tension because it's just evidence that is supporting whatever it is we're doing. So I think that will also help. On the comments from Elemo, the checklist for gender responsive budgeting so we're working on a guide paper currently, and I told my colleague Favor yesterday, we're working on a guide paper, which I think will be very useful to you, and we will share with ROLAC, an international idea, once the guide paper is prepared, and that will answer the question. We will move from gender responsive budgeting, but our goal is auditing because we're looking at impact at the end of the day and outcomes. So we're working on that guide paper, and we'll make it available to you once it's ready. Then Niger, what the people want and what the government wants. Well, there's always contention around that. as to what people want, because sometimes people don't even know what they want. But, again, that's why there has to be evidence. How much of needs assessment is conducted? What is the process for conducting the needs assessment? Who are the stakeholders that respond to the needs assessment? Are they really the kind of people that can respond adequately to the needs assessment? We have a philosophy, for instance, in the office, to say that this idea of citizens' engagement, how do you really, how do you really define citizens' engagement in a representative democracy? So we are now beginning to question some of these rationale and approach and methods that we have used in the past, because at the end of the day, when people are already at disadvantage, how can they represent themselves? And that's why in court, for instance, you get a lawyer, right? Because you are already at disadvantage, you don't know the law, and then you are coming from a weak point. You then need someone who can represent you properly, who can objectively look at your case and plead on your behalf. And that's what representative democracy is. But incidentally, in our environment, it's not what it should be. But I think we need to constantly question all of that. So in that case, what the people want, what the government wants, at the end of the day, what government should target is ensuring that there's evidence driving whatever service it is providing, and there will be less question around it. Then Rivers talked about funds releases and touched on the visit to babies. But what I will say about that is some things are necessary, but not all things are expedient. I think I'll leave it at that. The question around policy co-production. Yes, we can say that we involve all the stakeholders, but truly, if all stakeholders are involved, why do we have policy inconsistencies? Why do we have policy somersaults? If truly all stakeholders are involved, then you move from one government to another and then they throw everything away. If they were truly involved in the process of developing the previous policy, why are they throwing it away? If they bought into it wholeheartedly, why are they throwing it away? So it still goes to question the level of co-creation and co-production that goes into it. And what I'm saying is, let's involve as many as possible. We can take, for instance, 4 years to develop a policy. It's not the amount of time it takes. If we know that the policy will be sustained, we can take 4 years, for instance, to develop a policy, engage all that needs to be engaged, involve them. For instance, you look at the tax debate that is going on. If not for certain objections to the tax debate, it would have been like the normal, regular, it goes through the House and then everything, and then that's it. And then another government comes and says, no, we're not going ahead with this. So that's it. But now you can see that they are now going through the rigor of engaging all that needs to be engaged in the process. And that's the whole point about co-production. Then the statement about disaggregating vulnerability data along the different clusters. Yes, I acknowledge that. And I think that there's need to that because the needs differ along the different disability requests. Then there's the question of accountability of spending before new budgets are approved. That's why I touched on the role of the Auditor General. That's the that's the institution responsible for that, ensuring that public spending are properly audited, and the Auditor General will give his opinion. For instance, I know that our research report, our Subnational Audit Efficacy Index, and you will see it again when we publish it in the next couple of days, captures unaccounted funds across the 36 states, and you do have numerous amount of money in that regard. We also do capture the audit queries that have been raised by the Auditor General, and the whole process. I mean, I can't get into the details here, but it goes to further emphasize that the Office of the Auditor General is crucial, important, and we need to work with that office. The statement from the Ebonyi, addressing gender indicators since budgetary provisions are lumped up. Yes, one thing we have seen, because we have also reviewed over the last couple of weeks, we reviewed the approved budget for all the 36 states. We reviewed the financial statements for all the 36 states. We reviewed the audit reports for all the 36 states. And one thing that came out very clearly to us at the office is that the gender spending is lumped up. And then it's difficult to then disaggregate. But what I think is, if we have the CRCDU model, even where the spending is lumped up under a single component budget line, the indicators will differ. And that's why I said, the honorable commissioners, you will need to work with these other sectoral commissioners to say, because you can't carry all the burden alone. So you may need to have like, working groups or something like that, that will bring you with these other sectoral commissioners and say, what can you do for us in education? What can you do for us in healthcare? What can you do for us in agriculture? And there must be some conscious thinking, planning, evidence, data around it. Finally, collaboration with stakeholders. I talked about the role of legislature, how the legislature is important in appropriating funds to you, and the accountability component with the Committee on Appropriations and the committee responsible for public accounts. These are in fact, many people do not know, these are two important committees. But one of those two is the only committee mentioned by the Constitution. But the Parliament takes these two committees seriously. The Committee on Appropriations and then the committee responsible for public accounts. It's only the committee responsible for public accounts that is mentioned in the Constitution, Section 125, 126, 127, as it relates to subnational government, and Section 85, 86, 87 as relates to the federal. So you see how important this committee is, and by extension, the role of the legislature. And then the role of the Auditor General. Incidentally, the committee responsible for public accounts can do nothing without the Auditor General. They depend on the report of the Auditor General to be able to ensure that public spending are, effective, efficient, and achieve maximum economy. Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Olusegun Elemo, Public Finance and Policy Consultant. Thank you very much for all the clarity that you have provided. I hope that we have gained some insight and we'll be able to apply same effectively when we get back. It's time for tea break. Two quick things. I will invite Toyosi first for some announcements, and then we will revisit our housekeeping.
Thank you very much, Inimfon. And a big round of applause for Inimfon for joining with us so far today. I have a couple of announcements.